So my grandfather was Colonel Michael Ashby Chadwick Osborne. He was a pretty cool guy, and he was a career soldier. He probably joined up as soon as he was able to, age-wise, and stayed in long past when he probably should have retired. He did a lot of tours in a lot of different countries, Burma, Southeast Asia, all over the place as a commanding officer. And I think one of the coolest things about my grandfather is that he was very humble, and he never really talked about his contributions to ending armed conflict and helping innocent people. One of the most notable parts of my grandfather's career was during the Second World War. Towards the end of the Second World War, in May of 1945, after the Allied forces had pretty much regained control over Nazi Germany and the occupation that the Nazis had over countries in Europe, my grandfather was alerted that there was a gentleman who had wandered into an Allied interrogation center who bore really strong resemblance to Heinrich Himmler. And Heinrich Himmler was sort of Hitler's right-hand man. And
some say he was the architect of the Holocaust.
Some would say that, yeah. He was the, I believe he was the commander of the Nazi SS. So my grandfather got word of this, and so he immediately left headquarters and drove over there and was able to ascertain almost immediately that yes, indeed it was Heinrich Himmler who had wandered into the interrogation center. So my grandfather put Himmler into his vehicle and along with another officer transported him back to Army HQ. And when they got there, Himmler was commanded to strip out of his Nazi SS uniform. And he would not put on the British Allied Forces uniform because it was the enemy's uniform. And so he was put into a blanket. At that point, he needed to be examined by a doctor. I guess that was some sort of protocol, how they did things back then. They were checking to make sure he wasn't concealing anything. My grandfather left the room to make a call to report his capture. And when he was outside of the room, he heard a scuffle of some sort. When he came back in, Himmler was writhing on the floor, stark naked, and he somehow concealed some poison under his tongue and had taken the poison and committed suicide after his capture. So I think that's definitely a remarkable story that my grandfather was part of that part of history, and he never spoke about it, and I didn't know any of this until after his death, when I found out through the media what a huge role he had played. You always knew that Grandpa was a colonel. You always knew that Grandpa was very high up in the military, and you knew that he did some amazing things. But we didn't know about this until it came out. So I found the Wikipedia page. I thought, oh my gosh.
So you found out about what your grandfather did through Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, he never talked about the war, and being a child, you don't really ask about it too much. He did write his memoirs a number of years ago, and he did discuss it, but he never discussed the Holocaust. He never discussed the Second World War in too much detail. And the one time I did ask him about it, he said he didn't want to talk about it, but he did say to me that it was the worst of humanity. That's the worst that anyone could ever be. And so I just kind of left it at that, and we didn't talk to Grandpa about it too much. But he was highly decorated, and he was recognized throughout his life for his contributions to the military. He served as a Gold Staff officer at the Queen's coronation in 1953. And he was also aide-de-camp which is like a special military assistant to Princess Mary, the Princess Royal, who is the Queen's aunt. And Princess Mary actually ended up being my uncle's godmother. So there was that weird connection. Yeah, I certainly didn't receive an invitation to Harry and Meghan's wedding, I can assure you. But that was a pretty cool thing to find out as a kid, that Grandpa used to know a princess. So that was really neat. But he was great, and he brought his contributions to Canada as well. I believe it was the very late 50s, very early 60s. He taught at Royal Military College in Kingston. So my mom actually did her kindergarten year in Kingston. He was a really cool guy.
What do you think your grandfather would want people today to remember about the Holocaust?
Oh man, about the Holocaust, I think that he would probably just want people to remember. Don't forget history. Don't let history repeat itself.
And you said he was a tiny man, right?
Yeah, he wasn't huge. I mean, he was a pretty, like I think he would probably cap out around 5'9" or something like that. I mean, he was not, you think of, the big burly soldier. He wasn't. I mean, he was smaller in stature. He was a handsome devil, that's for sure. But yeah, he was
small but mighty.
Small but mighty. That's right. He was a cool guy. He had a wicked sense of humor, and he was a really cool guy. I'm very glad that he was my grandfather. I had him for many years. He passed away well into his 90s, so I got to know him well into my 20s. So that was pretty cool to have him around for that. He was born into the military. His father passed away in World War I. His brother died in combat as well. My grandfather was actually born during a Zeppelin raid. So that's, he was born to do this. He was a career soldier. It was his calling, and it was all he ever knew what to do. And I believe really that you do have your callings, and his calling was to serve at that time king and country.
And you talk about his medals. Did he receive a medal for his part in arresting Heinrich Himmler?
I'm not sure if it was directly related to that, but he received the Order of the British Empire, the Victoria Cross, some of the highest military honors that you can receive. I'm not clear as to whether or not it was directly related to that or not. Again, because we didn't discuss it too much as a family. So, but he did receive quite a few.
Did he ever talk about that time with your grandmother?
I'm not sure. They're the English upper crust. They're very stoic, and we don't talk about emotions. They don't talk about those things. I'm sure he did. I know that my grandmother put off marrying him for a few years because of his military service. I'm sure he did speak to her about it. She just recently passed away after a long battle with dementia. But I'm sure they did. But you don't talk about those things. It's something that you did. And he was a very humble man. It was something you did, and it was your service to king and country and to the citizens of the world, to protect them from evil. And it wasn't something that you boast over. So he would probably scold me pretty heavily for even talking about him with such high acclaim.